My name is Oliver King, and I learned the hard way that some things are better left unexplored. When my wife, Rachel, and I decided to buy the old cabin in the woods, we were looking for peace and quiet, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was a quaint place, nestled deep in the forest, with a small stream running beside it. The previous owners had left in a hurry, and we could never quite figure out why. There were rumors about the cabin. People in town whispered about strange lights in the forest at night. They said the woods were cursed, that the land was haunted by things that didn't belong, but we were skeptical. The idea of a peaceful retreat seemed too perfect to pass up. That first night, we went for a walk in the woods. The trees were thick, their branches heavy with mist. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest came alive with strange sounds. And then we saw them. Tiny lights floating among the trees at first. We thought they were fireflies, but these lights were different. They moved in unnatural patterns, darting between the trunks as if they were alive. Rachel grabbed my arm. "What is that?" "I don't know," I whispered. The lights circled us, drawing closer. It was as if they were beckoning us deeper into the forest. "Let's go back," Rachel urged. "This doesn't feel right." But I was too curious. I wanted to know what they were. What was causing them? We followed the lights deeper, past the trees, down into the shadowy parts of the forest, where the moonlight barely reached. The lights led us to a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A large stone altar, covered in moss and vines dot around it. The lights swirled faster, more frantic, and then they stopped, dead still. And in the silence, a voice. "You shouldn't have. Come." Rachel turned to me, her face pale. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The lights burst into a blinding flash, and I felt something cold and heavy grip my chest. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then, I saw them. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, standing at the edge of the clearing. Their eyes glowed faintly, like the lights. They were watching us. Rachel screamed, pulling me back toward the cabin, but the figures didn't follow. They simply watched us retreat, their eyes burning into our backs. We ran. When we reached the cabin, we slammed the door shut and bolted the windows. The forest outside was still, the lights gone, but I knew they were out there. They had seen us, and they were waiting. We left the cabin the next morning, but something followed us back to the city. Every night, the lights return hovering just outside my window. I hear them, soft whispers in the dark, calling me back, and every time I close my eyes, I see those glowing eyes, waiting. My name is Ethan Hayes, and I'll never forget the day I discovered what lives in the attic. When my wife, Lily, and I moved into the old house on Cedar Lane. It was a dream come true. The house was big, charming, and the price was surprisingly low for such a beautiful property. The only catch: the attic had a trap door in the ceiling, and the previous owners had left it locked. When I asked about it, they were oddly evasive. "Don't open it," they said. "It's better left alone." We laughed it off, thinking it was just another eccentricity of an old house. But Lily noticed something strange. One of the windows in the attic is always open, she said one morning. "I saw it last night when I went outside to get the mail." I shrugged it off. Old houses, weird drafts. Maybe the latch is broken. But that evening, as we were settling in, I heard something, a sound coming from above. A dragging noise, slow and deliberate. Lily and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Do you think it's animals?" she asked. I wasn't sure. It didn't sound like animals. It sounded human. The next morning, I decided to check the attic. The trapdoor was still locked, but the noise was growing louder. I grabbed a ladder from the garage and pried it open. The attic was dark, filled with old boxers and forgotten furniture. There were cobwebs everywhere, but something was wrong. It was too cold. I stepped inside, my breath fogging in the air. The noise had stopped, but there was someone in the far corner at first. I thought it was just a pile of old clothes. But then I saw movement. A shadow dot. It was standing there, staring at me. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a body. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't respond. I backed away, my heart racing. But then the figure moved. It didn't walk. It glided across the floor, toward me. I turned and ran, stumbling down the ladder. But when I reached the bottom, I heard it. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, following me down. I slammed the trapdoor shut and locked it, breathing heavily. Lily was standing in the hallway, wide-eyed. "What happened?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed to the ceiling. But she didn't understand. We moved out that night, but when we returned to retrieve our things a week later, the attic door was open, and the shadows inside had changed. They were closer now. My name is Ryan Miller, and I will never go back to that house. When my wife, Sarah, and I bought the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, we were looking for a fresh start. It was just the two of us, and the house was secluded enough that we could have the peace and quiet we needed. The house itself was a bit run down, but it had character, and that's what mattered. The first night we spent there, we heard footsteps upstairs. I froze in bed. The floorboards creaked, one heavy step after another, as if someone was walking down the hallway above us. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. I nodded, heart pounding. It's probably just the house settling. But the footsteps didn't stop. The next morning, I went upstairs to check. There was nothing, no sign of anyone. The rooms were empty, the windows shut tight. I told Sarah not to worry about it. It was probably the wind, or maybe animals on the roof. But the sound of footsteps kept coming back. Every night, they always started around midnights, slow, deliberate steps across the floor. Sometimes they would stop outside our bedroom door, as if someone was waiting there. One night, I decided to confront it. I grabbed a flashlight and crept upstairs, determined to find out what was going on. The house was silent, but as I reached the top of the stairs, the footsteps began again. I turned the corner, shining the light down the dark hallway, and that's when I saw it. A figure. It was standing at the end of the hall, facing away from me. The footsteps had stopped, but the figure didn't move. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I slowly started walking toward it, my heart thundering in my chest. The closer I got, the more I realized something was off. The figure was too still, too lifeless. When I was just a few feet away, the figure slowly turned its head, and I saw the face. It was my face, but twisted. Wrong. A smile too wide, eyes too dark. Before I could scream, the figure lunged at me. I ran downstairs, tripping in panic. The footsteps echoed behind me, closer, faster. I reached the front door and yanked it open, but it slammed shut in my face. I turned to see the figure standing in the doorway, smiling, and then everything went black. I woke up in the living room, Sarah beside me, looking terrified. "Ryan," she whispered, "we need to leave. You weren't responding. You were just staring at the door." I didn't understand. I couldn't remember what had happened after I ran to the door. We left the house that night, but I never felt safe again. A few days later, we learned the history of the farmhouse. It had once been owned by a man who had vanished mysteriously. The same night he was heard walking around upstairs. I still hear footsteps sometimes, but they're not just in my dreams, they're in the walls. My name is Daniel Reed, and I should have never opened that door. When my wife, Claire, and I moved into our new house, there was one rule from the previous owners: never open the basement door at night. We laughed it off. It had to be some Kind of joke, right? Just a way to scare the new homeowners. But the first night, I heard it. A faint knocking. I sat up in bed, listening. It was coming from downstairs. I walked into the hallway, my pulse pounding. Claire was still asleep. The knocking came again. Slow, rhythmic, from the basement. I told myself it was the pipes, or maybe the wind outside. I forced myself to go back to bed. The next morning, I checked the basement. The door was locked with an old, rusty padlock. I had to find the key. That night, the knocking returned. But this time, it wasn't slow. It was frantic. Claire woke up. "Daniel, do you hear that?" I nodded. My throat was dry. Then came the whisper, "Let me out." I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a crowbar, and stormed downstairs. I was done being afraid. I smashed the lock and yanked the door open. Nothing, just darkness. The basement stretched below, cold and empty. Claire stood behind me, shaking. "Close it," she whispered. But I couldn't, because in the far corner, something moved. A shape? A person? No, not a person. It was me, an exact copy of me. Standing in the shadows, it smiled, then it ran toward me. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking. Claire was screaming. I fumbled with the broken lock, trying to keep it closed. From the other side, there was only silence. Then, in a voice that was exactly like mine, "Let me out." We left the house that night. The next morning, I went back alone, determined to understand what had happened. But when I reached the basement, the door was sealed shut, like it had never been opened. My name is William Carter, and I still don't understand how a house can change itself. When my wife, Laura, and I moved into the old house on Pine Hollow Road, we thought we had found a hidden gem. It was an old Victorian, slightly run down, but full of potential. It had 4 bedrooms, a spacious attic, and a basement I swore I'd never step into. The day we moved in, Laura noticed something strange. "Will," she called from upstairs, her voice uncertain. "Did you see this extra door?" I climbed the stairs to find her standing in front of a narrow wooden door at the end of the hallway. I frowned. That door wasn't there during the house tour. I tried the handle, locked. We shrugged it off. The house was old, maybe we had just overlooked it. That night, I woke up to creaking floorboards. I turned to Laura, but she was sound asleep. Then I heard it. A soft knock, coming from inside the locked room. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing, just silence. The next morning, I grabbed a crowbar and pried the door open. Behind it was a small, empty room, dust-covered wooden floors. No windows, just 4 walls. But something felt wrong. Laura stepped inside and shivered. "It feels colder in here," I nodded. It was at least 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. A faint, damp smell clung to the air like rotting wood. That night, we heard the knock again. Louder this time. Laura squeezed my hand. "We should leave." I wanted to agree, but something about the room fascinated me. It shouldn't have been there. The blueprints didn't show it. The house tour didn't include it. It had appeared. The next day, I measured the hallway. I pressed against the walls. If this room existed, something else in the house should have been smaller. But everything checked out, and then Laura screamed. I ran upstairs to find her standing in front of the room. The door was open again, and inside, there was furniture, an old rocking chair, a dresser, a child's bed, covered in dust. I stepped inside, heart hammering. The air was thick, with something unseen. Then I saw it. Scratches on the floor, like someone had been dragged. We left that night. When we returned the next day with a real estate agent, the door was gone. Just a smooth wall, as if the room had never existed. My name is Christopher Lane, and I no longer trust reflections. When my wife, Anna, and I moved into our new house. Everything felt normal at first. It was a cozy suburban home, nothing too fancy, but perfect for starting our family. The only thing we found strange was the mirror. It was built into the hallway wall, floor to ceiling, and it wouldn't budge. The previous owners had left it behind, claiming it was part of the house's original structure. At first, we barely noticed it, but soon, little things started happening. The first time I felt uneasy was when I walked past the mirror late. One night, I swear I saw my reflection move wrong. Just a fraction of a second behind me, like it was lagging. I blamed it on exhaustion. Then Anna mentioned something strange. "Chris, did you notice the mirror?" she asked one evening. "What about it?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, I think I see something else in it. Behind us." I laughed it off. It's just our minds playing tricks. But I wasn't laughing a week later. One night, I got up for a glass of water. As I passed the mirror, I saw myself, but something was off. My reflection wasn't looking at me. It was staring at Anna, asleep in our bedroom. A cold chill ran through me. I waved my hand. My reflection followed. But when I stepped forward, it didn't move immediately. It hesitated, like it was thinking. I didn't tell Anna. The next day, she screamed. I ran to find her standing in front of the mirror, pale as death. "Chris, look." On the surface of the glass, near the bottom, were smudged fingerprints, small ones, like a child's. We didn't have kids. That night, I covered the mirror with a blanket, but around 3 a.m., I woke up to a rustling sound. The blanket was on the floor, and my reflection was smiling. I grabbed Anna, and we left the house that night. When we returned with a contractor to remove the mirror, he looked at us like we were crazy. "There's no mirror here," he said. I turned, my heart pounding. The wall was bare, no mirror, no frame, just smooth plaster, like it had never existed. My name is Jonathan Hayes, and I still don't know if what happened to my family was real or if we were just losing our minds. When we moved into the house on Briarwood Lane, everything felt perfect. It was a quiet neighborhood. The house was spacious, and my wife, Emily, was excited to start fresh with our daughter, Sophie. The only strange thing, the previous owners had left in a hurry, abandoning furniture, clothes, everything. At first it was little things, faint scratching, sounds inside the walls, a door that wouldn't stay shut, lights flickering. Then, Sophie started talking to someone. "She lives in the walls," she said one night at dinner, completely casual. Emily and I froze. "Who does, sweetheart?" Emily asked. "The girl." I forced a chuckle. "An imaginary friend, huh?" Sophie shook her head. "She's real, and she's trapped." I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, we heard its soft whispers coming from the vents. It sounded like a child's voice, too faint to make out words. I told myself it was just old pipes, but deep down, I knew better. One night, Sophie woke up screaming. We ran to her room, but she wasn't in bed. She was standing in the corner, facing the wall. "Sophie." Emily's voice was shaking. "She wants me to help her," Sophie whispered. "She says you won't listen." I grabbed Sophie and carried her out of the room. We needed to leave, but the house didn't want us to. As I reached the stairs, every door in the house slammed shut at once. The lights flickered violently. A deep, groaning sound echoed through the walls, like something waking up. Then the whispers turned into screams. Emily covered her ears, sobbing. Sophie clung to me, whispering, "She's angry." Desperate, I grabbed a crowbar and ran to the basement. If something was inside these walls, I was going to find it. I smashed through the drywall, coughing as dust filled the air, and then saw it, a small, wooden door. I hesitated, but the moment my fingers touched the handle, everything went silent. I pulled it open. Inside was a tiny, hidden space, and in that space, a single, rotting crib, and next to it, a name scratched into the wood. Margaret. Then cold fingers brushed my neck. A voice right behind me. Thank you. I ran upstairs, grabbed Emily and Sophie, and we never looked back. The house was sold within a month. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear the whispers. My name is Benjamin Cole, and I should have listened to my wife when she said something was wrong with the house. When Olivia and I bought the old colonial home on Maplewood Drive, it felt like a dream come true, a fresh start, a place to build, a life. The house had been sitting vacant for years, but we didn't mind. It had character. The first time I heard the noise, I was alone. A faint scraping sound coming from above. Mice, I told myself. Just mice in the attic. I was wrong. One night, Olivia shook me awake. Ben, there's someone in the house. I listened. The sound was there again. Slow, deliberate footsteps above us. I grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder. The moment I poked my head inside, the air changed. It was thick, stale. And then, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw them. Footprints in the dust. But they weren't normal. They started in the middle of the attic like someone had just appeared there. A chill ran down my spine. I backed away, closed the hatch, and told Olivia we'd check it in the morning. But that night, something else happened. At exactly 3:12 a.m., our bedroom door creaked open. I sat up, heart pounding. The hallway was pitch black, but I swear I saw something move. A tall, shadowy figure, just standing there, watching. Then it stepped back and disappeared. The next morning, Olivia begged me to leave. Something is wrong here, Ben. I feel it, but I was stubborn. I wanted proof. That evening, I set up an old baby monitor in the attic, one of those motion-activated ones. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. At 3:12 a.m., the monitor crackled. 2. LIFEA faint static. Then, breathing. Slow, deep, right next to the microphone. And then, a whisper, "Get out." That was enough for me. I ran up the attic stairs, yanked the monitor down, and threw it in the trash. The next day, we put the house on the market. But before we could leave, Olivia called me into the hallway. She was holding something in her trembling hands, an old photograph, dusty and torn at the edges. It was a family, a man, a woman, and their child standing in front of our house, and behind them, barely visible in the attic window, was a tall, shadowy figure, watching. My name is Ethan Carter, and I never believed in ghosts until we moved into that house. It was supposed to be a fresh start. My wife, Olivia, and I had saved 4 years to buy our dream home, a beautiful Victorian house on Willow Street. It had a wraparound porch, towering oak trees, and enough space for our son, Henry, to grow up in. Everything seemed perfect, until the first night. As we were settling in, Olivia called me from the kitchen, her voice trembling. "Ethan, did you hear that?" I hadn't, but when I stepped into the kitchen, the air felt wrong, heavy. A chill ran down my spine, despite the summer heat. That night, I woke up to the sound of whispers, faint, distant, like a conversation happening just out of reach. I nudged Olivia, but she was fast asleep. The whispering grew louder. I turned on the bedside lamp. Silence. The next morning, Henry complained about a bad dream. "There was a lady in my room," he said, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "She was crying." Olivia and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we brushed it off. Moving was stressful. Maybe it was just his imagination. But the noises got worse. Doors creaked, open on their own. We heard footsteps pacing in the hallway at night. Objects weren't where we left them. And then, Henry changed. He became withdrawn, staring at something only he could see. When we asked what was wrong, he'd shake his head and say, "She's sad." One night, I woke up to the sound of the baby monitor crackling with static. Then, a voice, "Henry." I bolted upright, heart pounding. I ran to his room. The moment I opened the door, the temperature dropped. Henry sat up in bed, his eyes unfocused. "She wants to leave," he whispered. That was the last straw. The next day, I went to the local library and searched for any information on the house. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1923, a woman named Eleanor Wren had lived there with her husband. He was abusive. One night she tried to run away, but he locked her in the basement. She was never seen again. The house had changed owners multiple times, each reporting strange occurrences before abandoning it. Determined to end this nightmare, I went to the basement. The air was thick, suffocating. I searched every corner until my flashlight caught something, a small, bricked-up section of the wall. My stomach twisted. I grabbed a hammer and started chipping away at the bricks. The stench hit me first. And then, as the dust cleared, I saw it. A skeletal hand, curled, as if reaching for help. A cold breath brushed against my ear. "Thank you." A rush of wind nearly knocked me over, and just like that, the house felt lighter, warmer. That night, Henry slept peacefully. The whispers were gone. We moved out a month later. I never told Olivia what I found in the basement. Some things are better left buried. My name is Daniel Wright, and I never should have ignored the warning about the room. When my wife, Claire, and I bought the old farmhouse on the edge of town, we thought we had found the perfect home for our daughter, Lily. The house was beautiful, wide, open fields, a wraparound porch, and enough space for Lily to play. But there was one thing that felt off. The house had a small windowless room at the end of the hallway upstairs. The previous owner had sealed it off, saying it was best left alone. I thought it was just superstition. So, on the first day, I broke down the wall and turned it into a playroom for Lily. That was the first mistake. That night, we heard soft tapping sounds coming from the room, like tiny fingers drumming against wood. I went to check, but it was empty. The next day, Lily started talking to someone. "It's just my friend," she said, her little hands braiding a doll's hair. Claire and I exchanged nervous glances. "What's your friend's name?" I asked. Lily looked up, her face serious. "She doesn't have one." The room grew colder each night. Shadows stretched in ways they shouldn't. Objects moved when no one was looking. Then Lily changed. She stopped sleeping in her bed, choosing instead to sit in the playroom for hours, whispering. When Claire tried to bring her out, Lily screamed. I had never heard a sound like that come from my child. One night I woke up to a sharp cry. I rushed to Lily's room, only to find her sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. "She doesn't want you here?" she whispered. I turned toward the doorway and felt my blood turn to ice. The playroom door was wide open. A dark figure stood inside. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. I slammed the door shut and grabbed Lily, running to our bedroom. Claire saw my face and didn't ask questions. The next day, I called the previous owner. "She's still there, isn't she?" the old man muttered. I demanded to know what he meant. "There was a little girl," he explained. "A long time ago. The family who lived there locked her inside that room when she got sick. They never let her out. She died in there, and she doesn't like to be disturbed." I felt sick. I had broken down that wall. I had let her out. That night, we packed our bags. But as we were leaving, Lily turned to look back at the house, her face blank. "She says you can't leave," she whispered. The door slammed shut behind us.